A couple months back, some friends of ours commissioned me for a console table for their new home in Iowa. They'd seen some stuff they liked on Etsy, but wanted something original and made by me specifically to be featured in the entryway of their home. Of course, my ego couldn't resist that offer, so I grabbed this slab of locally sourced cypress from my Sawyer friend and got to work. Since Waterfall console tables aren't particularly technical, I wanted to put a lot of visual detail to give it a stamp of originality, and I thought having a hand-sawn edge opposite the live edge was a nice touch, even though in practice it'll likely never be seen.
Of course, I didn't choose the hottest day of the year to do this.
I learned pretty quick that my track saw blade was about as dull as a spoon. Even in a very soft wood like cypress, it was bogging out and getting stuck at full depth, which forced me to take multiple little passes to complete the cut.
Jesus.
Shortly after this, I bit the bullet and ordered a new crosscut and rip-cut blade, and I'll send this general-purpose blade out for sharpening. Then it was on to getting this slab flat-ish. Since one of the details I wanted was to keep some of the saw marks from the chainsaw mill, I couldn't bring it all the way to flat because then there'd be no more mill marks, so I rough planed it down a bit, especially focusing on the areas closest to the mitered corners. I thought a cool idea would be to have this scalloped surface on the rear edge as well. Reminded me of Japanese adze work in timber frames, so I added that detail in with a hook knife. And then I lit the whole thing on fire. Yep, that's right. So this isn't Shoshugiban or even Yakisugi. I'll let you go on a whole Google search as to why, but again, in the attempt to create further uniqueness and detail, I wanted to burn the piece to enhance color and texture. By burning the entire piece and then using a homemade uzukuri brush, I could remove material from between the growth rings, which gave this piece a lot of character to the touch. I also thought it would be an awesome detail on the mitered corners to have the pronounced growth rings line up perfectly. Now, speaking of my homemade uzukuri brush, I primarily used two, one being an extremely coarse one made from one of those plastic or nylon masonry brushes bound together with zip ties. That was for the bulk material removal, and then I would follow up with one made from a cut of horsehair to burnish and give shine. I also fiddled around with a little bit of steel wool, but I wanted to steer clear of sandpaper since I wanted a clear color differentiation between the growth rings and the material between them. Now, I've been learning a little Japanese lately using the good old Duolingo, and I've got a sneaking suspicion that uzukuri is a specific type of brush, so when I say uzukuri brush, I might technically be saying brush. Kind of how people call the traditional wagatabon a wagatabon tray, which then means you're saying tray, but I digress. Now that I've burned this piece, I'm trying to lighten the color of the material between the growth rings, which proved to be somewhat difficult as abrading it with brushes worked to an extent, but it also kind of moved the carbon content around a bit. I started with some denatured alcohol at first in an attempt to pull some of that out, but after speaking with an internet friend who is a furniture conservator, I landed on a lye-based stripper from the Real Milk Paint Company. If you want to throw some singles at this stripper, you can head over to their website where coupon code CowDogCraftworks will get you 10% off their line of products. This was my first time using their milk paint remover, and I have to say that the whole process felt very alien to me, but it seemed to work fairly well. My whole concern was that ultimately I was going to put a wax finish on this, and while that wax finish is not a saturating finish like an oil, it indeed will saturate the surface to an extent, so I wanted to avoid just having a finished product that looked almost ebonized.
Here we are, this is a little under 24 hours. You can see here like where a lot of the colors actually starting to pull through this lye-based stripper. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rehydrate everything using a spray bottle, and then I'm gonna start scrubbing all the stripper away with these nylon brushes. And once I do that, kind of rinse it off and try to get this back to bare wood. You know, the idea being that it's gonna bring out a lot of those original tones in the wood. In between the growth rings that have been charred, a lot of that material will be lighter, whereas those growth rings will still be dark. This shouldn't take too long, but once I'm done with that, I'm gonna let it sit and air dry out.
The miters are pretty mission critical to this build, so using the MFT table with the track saw, these nails are going to give me a positive stop for the track to reference against to ensure that I'm keeping everything nice and tight to the edge to preserve that grain continuity that Waterfall miters are known for. Also, pull those finish nails out before the cut. I don't need one of you chuckleheads telling me about how I ruined your tools or your project because you ran over a nail with your track saw. If you're liking this video and what I'm about here on this channel, I'd love it if you'd share this video with someone else who loves this kind of content too. If you're looking for more daily content, I'm on other social platforms as well, but admittedly, since the birth of my daughter, I have been a little less active. However, fear not, I'm still making stuff and making videos, just doing it, well, slower.
This is the downside of not having perfectly square and perfect boards that I'm trying to work with, because I'm trying to do this natural sort of form. But as I kind of twist this a little bit and meet this side up, everything gets clean again. Everything is lining up good. Like, everything on the inside looks good. Need a little more pressure probably. So I had this idea, because this wasn't lining up, if I removed a little bit of the material from this tenon on the top side and took the offcut, glued it onto the bottom side, that I could sort of adjust for that skew in the miter, and that should actually get me to be able to line up my edges. Now, I sort of eyeballed it. I kind of looked to see, I guess, how much was off. I mean, it looked like it was about maybe 2 mil of skew. So I'm gonna test this out. I'm gonna just use some CA glue and dab this onto the back here. And we'll give it a whirl. Yeah, you can see the growth rings lining up. It's nice on the edge here too. There's a little bit of chisel editing I'm gonna have to do over here too. And probably some touch-up burning and torching. Gotta get the color to line up nicely, but yeah, this will work.
For the glue up, I'm going with hide glue for the most part. I used yellow glue to fix the tenons permanently into one side, and then used hide glue on the mortise side, although I guess with a floating tenon, they're technically both the mortise side, but that's neither here nor there.
So as I brush here, what I want to sort of focus on is getting it towards the edge. So the miter came out really well. However, there is, just by the virtue of the burning, a little bit of a gap there. Kind of in the way that you see folks take like a burnishing rod or something like that, and they'll use it to close up that miter. That's kind of what I'm doing with this brush. I'm coming at it from both sides, and I kind of just want to roll that edge a little bit just to get it so that it's nice and crispy. This will give me a little bit of a tighter miter than I would have otherwise. So you can see right in there, I mean, that's just a little smidge, but all my growth rings are nicely lining up, which was really, that was the primary goal of this.
As I said earlier, the finish is a simple wax, especially since I put so much effort into burnishing and creating a shiny surface with uzukuri and finishing with plane shavings. This stuff is great and foolproof to apply and maintain, just a simple wipe on and wipe off.
So when using a paste wax or any kind of carnauba wax, or in this case the clear soft wax, sometimes you'll end up with wax in your cracks, in your knots. The way that I deal with that is I use a heat gun, get this thing kind of preheated. You can also use a hair dryer, it's basically the same concept. And you'll just kind of run over the top until that wax melts. And once it melts, you're just gonna wanna wipe that excess right off. And that'll help you get a nice even sheen too.
And then that was it. Off to the blanket wrap shipper and then a safe landing in Des Moines, Iowa. Or so I thought.
This morning, the heat is on.
With temperatures over 100 degrees, which is where we're going to be.
About 82% of the U.S. population is expected to experience 90-degree weather this week.
And several other cities are slated to shatter records.
Hello? Oh, hey Jerry, how are you? Excuse me? What do you mean it all just fell apart? So you picked it up and then the legs just came out? So what's the plan? Of course. All right, thanks. Thank you for calling. Appreciate it. Okay, bye.
My working theory is that the hide glue, reversible through heat, sitting in a Sprinter van with no climate control except when it's running, during a blistering heat wave, did exactly that. It reversed itself. The glue for all intents and purposes melted and the joinery failed. Since this is my craftsmanship and honestly my art, I wanted to ensure that this was repaired perfectly, so we loaded up the family and headed to the Midwest. And since flights from Fort Lauderdale to Des Moines weren't excellent in terms of time and layovers, we flew to Omaha, Nebraska and drove the 2 hours east to Des Moines.
So the package is here. There's surprisingly not as much damage as I expected. There's a couple scratches. Didn't really impact the finish too much. Everything is fine. Like, it's just that the hide glue reversed itself with the heat. I mean, listen, you make bad calls, you just got to deal with it, and you got to stand behind your work. So that's what we're doing here. I'm headed right now to my buddy Steve Mosley's shop. He's only about 6 miles away. Gotta hit a Menards along the way, get some glue. I'm gonna be a nice guy and not use all his consumables and just kind of hopefully use his clamps only. So yeah, let's see how this goes.
So if you don't know Steve Mosley, check him out at Making It Home on essentially every social media platform. Steve was kind enough to let me use his home shop and his clamps to get this thing back together.
I was a little surprised about that.
Since the wood dried out even further during the journey in the blistering heat, I opted to go with poly glue to ensure that gaps were filled, but candidly, to make sure that this literally will never come apart ever again. And I gotta say, it was nice hanging with Steve in his natural environment. As woodworkers, we're often isolated to our own shops, talking to ourselves, and in my case, sometimes talking to a camera. So it was enjoyable just have someone I could ham with for a bit and take the edge off of a really pretty stressful situation for me.
So poly glue like this is going to expand and foam. I just want to put it inside the tenon, but those flat surfaces, these end grain surfaces that are going to touch, I only want it centralized, and I'm kind of doing it in thirds to ensure that I don't get any squeeze out. And I noticed when I was kind of doing a test fit that the miters are really still very crisp, but the inside face has got a little bit of a cut to it, and that's definitely the amount of heat that this was subjected to inside that Sprinter van while it was being delivered. Now to activate the poly glue, I'm going to use wet rag. I'm going to wipe a little bit of water all over the inside of this joint. But the water acts as a catalyst to kick off the poly glue and start that bonding. And this stuff has a fairly long open time. Not particularly stressing out about that, but I do still have to kind of give it a little hustle because it will kick off a lot faster than you're expecting if you're not careful. You're on it. Gosh, that much room.
The next day.
After 18 holes of golf, I popped back by Steve's shop to get this table out of the clamps, and honestly, I got super duper lucky. No squeeze out to worry about, the joints felt really solid, and the finish stayed pretty excellent.
Quite lucky. Honestly, these miters might be tighter than when they started.
And that's all for this one. Really caught a break on getting this one back together and looking beautiful. Stand by your craftsmanship and don't use hide glue during a heat wave. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time here at Cowdog Craftworks.